Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Ed Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Like and share this video. Join the Rabyd Nation, a nation people dedicated to normalizing atheism and deconversion by hitting the subscribe button. And if you want to support the channel in a more tangible way, hit the join button, and your membership options that lead to citizenship in the Rabyd Nation will be presented to you. Today I'm responding to a video by Inspired Work where he claims he has 10 questions that atheists cannot answer. What I'm going to do is kind of watch this video, and with the added challenge to myself, not going to do really any research on how I would answer these questions, but go on what I have learned since I've deconverted. But the main thing that I'm going to be asking is a couple of questions of my own. Does this question actually address atheism, and can atheists really not answer that question? So without further ado, let's get into his questions.
Do you really believe that science is the only answer to all of life's questions?
Is science the only answer for all of life's questions? Well, short answer, no. But this firstly isn't a question about atheism, the non-belief in a postulate there is no God. So we're not off to a good start right there. Science is utilized by a lot of different people, including people of faith. I trust it more than faith because it's a method that produces predictable results and evidence for its conclusion, unlike faith. Science, however, needs to be practically applied, and sometimes what we would need to know scientifically is very massive about a certain issue. So it's not always pragmatic to answer questions like, why do we exist and what is our purpose? Perhaps if we knew enough and could sort out all that information, we'd have answers to those questions. But, questions about our relationships with our family often don't really have too much of a scientific basis other than all the biochemistry that might be involved, but we don't know that, so we kind of go forward without it. In a sense, we develop philosophies of how we live our life, how we relate with others, and we don't necessarily always use science, but that doesn't mean there aren't good pragmatic tools to do that. But no, I don't. I think there are other tools in the toolbox to assessing truth, including logic and reason and philosophy. So no, I don't think that, and that's kind of a misnomer about atheists, that all we believe in is science, and that's just not true. So is this about atheism? Not really. But is it answered? Check.
If God doesn't exist, why do you care if people worship him?
If God doesn't exist, why do I care if people worship him? I suppose this is related to atheism, but it isn't something that I cannot answer. I care because I don't like it when people are lied to and taken advantage of. Religion does this to an extreme in that it lives on false promises and exaggerated claims. It's like asking, why do you care that people are victims of fraud and continue to be victims of fraud because they are deceived into thinking something false is true. Wasted money, opportunities, and relationships, and more importantly, wasting the one life that you have on superstitious nonsense is a big deal to me because I care about people. Atheism, sort of. Questions answered, check.
Seriously, can nothing create something?
Can nothing create something? No. I don't know of any atheist that has ever believed this, and I certainly don't. But then again, I have never believed nothing created something. That is something, this whole idea is something apologists have added to what the Big Bang, etc. is all about. Krauss, in his book, A Universe from Nothing, actually points out that nothing isn't really nothing. So this question is about promoting a straw man argument of the apologists. It is also not about atheism, as many theists, including the guy who discovered the Big Bang cosmology, were believers. It's actually more about many believers, that believe God created something out of nothing. You guys are the ones that believe God said, let there be light, and there was light out of poof, magic, but not me. This isn't really about atheism, but it's also a question based on a false premise that atheists believe that nothing created something. We don't believe that, okay, and we never have. I don't know anybody who does, and it's a trope of the apologist to kind of use a straw man to poison the well and show how, oh, look at those atheists, how nonsensical there are. And it's actually a bunch of projection too, because there's a bunch of theists who believe God created something out of nothing using magic. So, yeah, project much. Atheism, not really. Answered? Check.
If you've never been to the ends of the earth, if you've never been to every planet, if you've never been to every part of the universe, how do you know that God doesn't exist?
How do you know God doesn't exist? What God are we talking about, first of all? But in any case, the issue is whether the evidence for such God exists. So this is about atheism, but the answer to that question will really depend on whether you're a hard or soft atheist. In any case, I could ask you, if you had been in all those places, how do you know that your God exists? Okay, I could ask the question, how do you know that there is no teapot revolving around the planet of Neptune? Okay, this deals with epistemology. Probably because that, given our knowledge, we can't say it's impossible that a teapot is revolving around Nebula, but there's no evidence for that, and given what we do know about the universe and how things work, it's very unlikely. The same applies to all claims where something is proposed that has no evidence we have discovered. I don't believe in leprechauns for the same reason I don't believe in God. You also could be engaging with this question, seeing you haven't been everywhere, how can you know that Zeus, Thor, and Vishnu don't exist? I think the question backfires you at that point. It really backfires in your face on that point. The atheist simply listens to the evidence proposed for God and says that's not convincing to me. It's really the burden of proof issue where the theists are trying to reverse the burden of proof, forcing me to prove the non-existence of God. Only hard atheists have that challenge. But I can see where the non-evidence of God for them is good evidence against God's existence, and they would cite that as part of their evidence, that, well, there really isn't any evidence for the existence of God, so I don't have to believe him, and I can make the conclusion that he doesn't exist. You don't need a lot of evidence to do that. Atheism, yeah, this question is definitely about atheism, but also it's answered, so answered, check.
What is the origin of life?
What is the origin of life? Short answer, chemistry. Abiogenesis had come a long way in developing the ways chemically we can go from something classified as non-life to life. There's a lot of good hypotheses based on chemistry and showing how it could have happened, how based on what we know about chemistry, we can move from things that are non-organic to things that are organic. This isn't really about atheism because there's a lot of people that work in abiogenesis that could probably be classified as believers. But so the idea, I suppose, is to say that if I don't possibly have an answer to this question that's definitive, how do we know how abiogenesis actually happened? Probably no, and we never will. But that doesn't mean that we flip it around and say, well, if I don't know, then God gets to fill into that gap. There's an assumption of the God of the gaps argument behind this question. And the problem I have with that is just because I don't know, and maybe abiogenesis doesn't have all the answers as to how things went from non-life to life, that doesn't mean you get to put God in that gap. You have to justify why God belongs there. You can't just assume it. Atheism, this really isn't a question about atheism, but it is answered, so answered, check.
If humans are animals, then where does our sense of justice, where does our sense of morality, where does our sense of what's right and what's wrong come from?
Where do morals come from? So there's a question here based on the moral argument. I sense the assumption that the moral argument is a proof for God here. But here's the thing. You don't need a God to have morality. All social species have morality. It is an outgrowth of being a social species. We gain survival and thriving advantages by being cooperative, helping each other, and not doing harm to each other. A member of a social species thus develops morals that lead to its survival and well-being for the rest of the people around it. Those that step out of these moral codes that develop usually don't last long and fade out of the society, and thus natural selection kind of selects them out. But morality is constantly and consistently evolving as a social species develops. Sort of a kind of a question about atheism, and it said that the postulate is that without God, morality doesn't exist. But several theories about how morals develop on their own through evolution and natural selection as a species are out there. maybe you should examine them. Atheism, sort of. Answered, check.
If you were given irrefutable evidence that the God of the Bible is real, would you become a Christian?
If you were given evidence that the God of the Bible is real, would you become a Christian? Nope. Guy is not a benevolent God and has a lot of issues, from being genocidal, not coming up with a very good plan of salvation, etc., etc. He is murderous, and there would be no guarantee that on a whim, even in the afterlife, that he wouldn't kill me if I did follow him. Firstly, there's plenty of evidence that says he doesn't exist, and for that I'm very thankful, not just for myself, but for everybody else. Secondly, I would only follow a good God if one existed, and the God of the Bible is not a good God. In short, I think he's a malevolent God, and I would take the axiom, if God exists and benevolent, yeah, sure, I'd serve him. If God exists and malevolent, as a good human being, I wouldn't serve him. And if he doesn't exist, it doesn't really matter. I'd still want to live a virtuous life because it's good for everybody else. Living a good moral life is beneficial to myself and everybody else. It has a pragmatic value. So, yeah, I'm not going to serve that God, even if he was proven to exist, for the same reason I wouldn't serve any malevolent God. Atheism, yes, evidence for a God that would be convincing, but also this question has been answered by an atheist, so check.
Tell me something. If evolution is real, and if evolution is really happening, how come there are no transitional forms that we can observe?
If evolution is true, why are there no observable transitional forms present? But there are. I mean, the documentation of evolution at this point, including transitional forms, quote unquote, is all so vast that is why evolution has graduated to the point of being a scientific theory, up there with the atomic theory and the theory of gravity, etc. The fact that all species, including our own, are transitional so it's really a bad question, because you're saying that you personally don't see transitional forms, so therefore they don't exist. The problem is every form of life on planet Earth is in transition from one thing to another. So the idea of a transitional form is a little bit of a misnomer in the first place. This doesn't really have much to do with atheism, but evolution. I would say that that the evidence for evolution is so overwhelming. That is why it took me from being a creationist into an evolution. The problem with evolution is it's an established fact, and no amount of wishful thinking gets you past that. Atheism, not really. Answered, check.
Do you live according to what you believe, or do you live your life according to what you lack in belief?
Do you live according to what you believe or what you lack in belief? That's a weird question, and I don't live according to what I believe anymore as much as possible. I have realized that beliefs could be an error. Rather, I try to live based on what can I assert to be true and prove to be true, and a practical philosophy that works for me. Non-belief in God doesn't really factor in, except I don't consider anything superstitious informing how I live anymore. It basically erases the God belief from the equation on how do I live my life. It's actually quite liberating to get rid of all the religious stuff, and that opens up a lot of time, space, and energy for you, to be quite honest. But I also think this question is a false dichotomy. There are many other things to consider other than belief or non-belief as the basis of how somebody lives. There's far more to it than what I believe or don't believe in. Atheism, yes, because it addresses the belief and non-belief issue, but there's also the problem that makes the question too narrowly focused, in my opinion. Is this question answered by an atheist? Well, I'm an atheist, so yes, check.
If God doesn't exist and the Christian dies, the Christian loses nothing. But if God does exist and you die as an atheist, do you not lose more? Will you not lose your soul?
If God exists, will you not lose your soul when you die? Pascal's wager again. Oh boy. Actually, the Christian loses a lot more than what you indicate. You do realize that Christ himself says, count the cost, leaving family, giving to the church, and laying down your life. Taking up your cross speaks of being willing to die for your beliefs, willing to give up the one life that you have for those beliefs. If it turns out to be false, then you have wasted the one and only life that you have. You have wasted the most precious thing you possess, your life, for a lie. Paul talks about the cost he had to pay to preach the resurrection and says that if it wasn't true, then he of all men was most miserable, having to suffer through a whole bunch of things for nothing. Do you people actually read your own book when it talks about the cost of being a Christian and consider the implications of your own book if it turns out to not be true? Your own book tells you to count the cost, and based on the question and how it's framed, I don't think you've really done that. As an atheist, though, I can enjoy the one life I get to the full measure, knowing it will end someday. I realize it's precious because it's finite. The question also has the problem of assuming souls exist without evidence. I would say the evidence of souls actually existing would have to be proven before you can prove to me that it's something that I can lose. I mean, to be honest, the wager really favors the atheism, in my opinion, because you have to be sure that you're betting on the right God, the right afterlife criteria, and a whole bunch of other things that are right that can be asserted but have no evidence provided for them. Does this question have something to do with atheism? Yeah, sort of. Have I answered? Check. And hey, that's number 10, so got them all.
Hebrews chapter 11 verse 3 says, "By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible."
Hebrews 11. You quote Hebrews 11:3, and what a coincidence. I'm doing an atheist Bible study on that chapter called Heroes of Faith. The problem is that the writer of Hebrews spends the first 3 verses engaging in basically a postulate. It says that faith is evidence for something being true. To be frank, that's BS. It's absolute bullshit. People can be engaged in believing in anything. That doesn't make anything that they believe in true. Faith proves nothing, and that's the problem with it. Faith is not evidence, and that's the postulate the writer of Hebrews is taking. If it did, then it means all religions and superstitions are true because everybody has faith in whatever they believe in. One of the falsest things said in the Bible is Hebrews 11, 1 through 3. And, oh yeah, I don't believe your book.
Now, just because we can't visibly see something, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. We cannot see God, but it doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. For example, we cannot see the wind, but we do feel the wind. We also feel the effects of the wind, and we also experience the movement of the wind.
The wind, compared to God, how often does this happen? Yeah, something not registering of the visual reception does not mean that it does not exist. It just means that we can't measure it or sense it. X-rays, radiation, things like that also have that same quality. I grant that there is a couple of differences, though, between the wind and God. We can measure the wind. We know its sources and how it works. None of that is true for God. Wind gives us evidence of his existence. God does not. But thanks for pointing that out.
And so the truth is, creation itself testifies of an all-powerful and imaginative creator. And so to the atheist, I would encourage you to be open-minded to the existence of God and to the possibilities of having a relationship with your creator.
The assumption that you have that everything is the effect that is caused by God is an assumption that is unproven, okay? I can see a lot of natural forces that have caused what we see with no God required. You also assume that I'm closed-minded. No, I'm just not open-minded to the point that my brain falls out. Are you open-minded about the fact that your God might not exist? Do you even consider that possibility? If you're going to sit there and ask me to be open-minded about the possibility of God, you have to do the same for the possibility of not believing in God. I used to believe as you do. I gave it up because I realized faith is not good evidence for anything, and in fact is auto-deceptive by its nature, and religion is a system that reinforces faith. You can believe in anything. Proving something with evidence is far harder, and no one in my mind has convincing evidence of God's existence. This seems strange to me that the God you are proposing should leave a ton of evidence, but no, he doesn't. Okay, so the final tally when all things have been considered is I've answered all the questions, so your title is false. I really wish people like you and all the rest of these apologists, when they do these question videos, would retitle them. Questions Atheists Can Answer, but we disagree with their answers, and then try to point out why you disagree. It would be more accurate and more honest, because then it would be more of a dialogue where you have to put up actual atheist responses and then answer their responses and continue the dialogue. But too often these questions atheists can't answer is just a way of shutting down dialogue once the questions are answered, and you have absolutely no intention of responding to the atheist. You just think these are zingers that will get an atheist pinned down, but that's not the way it works. I don't point out that not all of these questions had anything to do with atheism, which shows you have a poor understanding of what atheism is. It's only about one postulate: is there a God? The answer the atheist says usually is there's no evidence for his existence, so I would say no. I would have taken this video and given the answers back to you and put it in a link into your comment section, but I noticed that you disabled them. Thanks everybody for watching. I appreciate all the likes, shares, and subscribes. You guys are great. I want to give out a shout out to my members, to my citizens, to my Rabyd citizens. You guys are really supporting the channel in a very tangible way, and thus you've earned your citizenship, so thank you very, very much. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around, so you don't want to waste it on the false promises and exaggerated claims of religion and their non-proven God. And instead, spend those things on building up yourself, building the relationships that you have with the people that you love and care for, and to make this a better world. You'll be happier if you do. I speak from experience. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.